Thank you, Datin Dr. Ng. Can I just confirm, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, very clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so while I'm doing my technical things so that I can share with all of you. Okay, now can someone confirm to me, is it here now? Can you see the slide that I'm sharing?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and good morning. Thank you so much to our honorable moderator, Datin Dr. Ng from QRAM, and especially for Professor Dr. Tong, President of QRAM, and along with me today, Professor Dr. Khatijah, the Vice President of QRAM, and especially to the host of this roadshow of IQRC, University Malaysia Sabah, especially for the Faculty of Psychology and Education, UMS, Associate Professor Dr. Sabaria, and Associate Professor Dr. Balad Radhakrishnan. Thank you so much, and I think I am more than honored to be one of the speakers for today, and I would like to also share the experiences that I have been doing for the past 7 years of my teaching on qualitative research methodology subject for higher degree research students at UTHM. And also on top of what I think Dr. Ng has been introduced briefly about myself, I was also recently, 2019 actually, started to engage with doctorate support group members from the Facebook group. And we have lots of discussion on qualitative research, especially for the novice qualitative researchers. And we have programs every month on that as well. Regarding on this is about, the first slide is about myself. Yes, I am Noor Sofurah, and you can call me either Noor, or maybe most of my colleagues call me Soft, with the hope that, my heart is always soft. And well, for today, I would not actually just give a speech on what is about qualitative approach to qualitative inquiry, but also about sharing the experiences that I get when I teach for the past 7 years in qualitative research methodology. Because in this area, choosing what approach is especially the best for our own research is always, a dilemma, or students always have perplexity in deciding what's the best approach for their own research. And since, just like Associate Professor Dr. Sabaria has mentioned just now, we have interdisciplinary between education and psychology sometimes, and even in education itself, we have, sometimes we include like cross-cultural research of what I'm doing, always include psychology matters a bit, and about mental and health, mental well-being, and especially in the COVID era, we have lots of studies on, well-being of individual students and lecturers and such. So this is about choosing approach that we can do, as how adapted very much from Creswell and Hoff's recent book from 2018 under the title Qualitative Inquiry and Research Design, Choosing Among 5 Approaches. So this has been quite like a book that I use so much in my teaching. And I found that students really appreciated how Creswell especially has put things into a structural way, so that we have a systematic way on how to introduce our approach and to present our research study, especially in the defense proposal or any seminars, or even in the Viva. So this is about why we need to identify our approach when it comes to qualitative inquiry. I think maybe most of us is quite familiar with the question, like, qualitative takes a long time, and then qualitative is just, somehow philosophical a bit, not a bit, quite much, that, it's not really what's next and what's next. And if we, and students especially, and even sometimes ourselves, always compare with quantitative research, which I argue so much about. This is not about comparing which one is better than which, but this is about complementing and what is the, why we use qualitative research and sometimes why we use quantitative research in our own research. So one of the things that I found very useful when, when we discuss about qualitative research is when we can identify the approach of our qualitative inquiry when we conduct any qualitative study. This is because this could be one of the ways that we can systematically arrange our research and present it in an organized way, And one of the things that I learned throughout my own research during my PhD and also my research in the grants that I am involved with since 2009, having an approach, a specific type and structure is always good for the examiner to properly assess our own study and the paper or the project or the proposal that we handed to them, even for any proposal of any grant application. And I found that from my own observations and my colleagues' observation from UTHM especially, we found that when we have a systematic way in presenting our research, our qualitative research, it makes sense a lot for non-qualitative researchers. And that really helps in other people, especially for us to educate other people and to make other people aware of how we are actually arranging our minds and our work so that other people and other individuals can get their interest to our own research. And the third purpose and why we need to identify our approach is to demonstrate a scholarly work, because we actually, for the qualitative inquiry researchers, we actually have a scholarly work to present. But without demonstrating it correctly and without having the ability to present it eloquently, we somehow, make other people who actually listen to our presentation overwhelmed. And it's very hard for them to understand how qualitative can be a systematic inquiry. So I believe that when I have read and used Creswell's book, especially this book, myself, I understand and, can, from my own experiences, I believe that the way that he actually elaborated can become a way that is systematically presented. So this is what I'm going to share with all of you today. And I do hope that, it opens our eyes in how we can do things in a specific and more structured way. So based on Creswell and Paul in their book, and actually from other authors as well, for example, Mariam or Yin and Sake, Bogdan and Wickland, Danson and Lincoln, Vail, name it. They always start with qualitative approaches to inquiry from 5 basic approaches. And somehow some of the authors use the word design as well. So I found that these terms have been used interchangeably. So some of them use basic qualitative research, some of them use basic qualitative design to inquiry, and but Creswell and Paul, they use qualitative approaches to inquiry. So these 5 are actually narrative study, case study, ethnography, grounded theory, and phenomenology. So this is going to be my next and last slide that has been very useful, that I've been using for the past years in teaching or in sharing about approaches in qualitative inquiry. So I call this the compendium of approaches in qualitative inquiry. And this is very much adapted from Creswell and Paul's book, but as well as, on top of that, the authors that I have mentioned in this table as well. So the first thing that we can actually identify in our research in related to how are we going to decide our approach is to see at what we call it as the central phenomenon. So sometimes I found that only Creswell somehow uses this term, but I really love to use it as well because it really makes sense of what we are trying to argue in our qualitative research as well. Because we have qualitative research central phenomenon, we have this research focus which we centralize on, and usually is one thing that we focus on every our study. So in narrative study, our first approach, usually it's when we try to explore and understand individual life. So as how the authors, from Creswell to the main authors that I have presented to you at the right of the table, Bungening, Connolly, and Chase, for example, they have this individual lives as their research focus or their central phenomenon. So somehow we can say that, does our research focus to explore and understand individual lives? Okay, is it a story of individual experiences? If it is, and then narrative could be one of the approaches that suit to our study. So we understand that qualitative research doesn't really have this, a design that is very structured and vacuumed into a flow chart of what's next and what's next. It's always about complementing. It's always about interrelating, and somehow the approaches can be combined. But for novice researchers, we always tend to share and make them choose one of the approaches that best suit their study. And then when they almost become, a finishing student, and when they have become confident in their own research, and they understand much more about their approaches, and somehow it could actually change, or it could be combined with other approaches. And this is also supported by Creswell himself, you see. So the second approach that I would like to actually share with you is case studies approach. And this is quite actually popular among the graduate researchers, especially in UTHM as well. And I think this is because of the nature of case study, and the central phenomenon or the research focus is always about exploring an issue. So usually when we teach qualitative research or we do a research, we always start with some, problem or issues, you can call it. And then when we try to explore it, and then we come to understand an issue that, in a real life situation that becomes an issue in a setting, in a bounded setting. So usually we found this quite manageable for PhD students. That's from my own experiences, and even I myself have experiences of doing case study in my own PhD. So this is about exploring something and trying to understand in depth of a situation which has a bounded setting. So I think this particular term or this particular parameter is very crucial for a novice researcher, especially, to firstly identify whether their research is having this kind of focus, and if it is, and then it becomes it probably is a case study approach. So, and then we found that the third approach is ethnographic study. So in ethnographic study, the research focus or the central phenomenon that has been used by Creswell and also some other researchers from ethnography books, for example, Atkinson and Hammersley, Cuthbert, Picken and Apple, and also Van Manen, they use this word as exploring and understanding behaviors, language, and instruction of a culture sharing group. So even though somehow, if our students or ourselves, are conducting a research which is trying to explore something and understand in depth a real life situation in a specific setting, but if the lens of our research is to focus on the culture sharing group, not necessarily orang asli or such, but somehow talking about the culture that the group is playing on and the lens that we're looking is from that aspect. It could be ethnographic study as well. Yeah. So this is I found that, from my experiences, I found that this is very useful for students, even for myself, to identify which approach that we can start with. Because why? Because after we have this understanding of research focus or central phenomenon, and then we can use this table for the next element. For example, the key features, the common types that we have in the particular approach, and then the common methods that are used in each approaches, and the common analysis, and how do we plan to have our findings and discussions and conclusions, and especially the main authors that we can start to read on. Yeah. So as for the first step is actually to identify the research focus, or how we call it as central phenomenon, and this is very helpful to move on in our own research. So the fourth approach that I'm going to share with you today is grounded theory, and from Creswell, Strauss and Carbin, Glasser and Strauss, and Karmas, they use the word or the term or the research focus on ongoing or a process of an event. So although they use the word generate or discover theory, but all of them use the same term, which is ongoing or a process that have that include quite some time. So somehow grounded theory is always focusing on a process or event over time, developing something, a program or educational program that has, sort of before the program is being done, before the program is being, is being drafted, or even at the moment the program or an event is being an idea, and it has a long term or long duration of, conducting or doing something, and then it becomes a grounded theory. It could become a grounded theory approach. So this is not really popular, at least at FPTV, at least at my faculty at UTHM, but it becomes quite popular when I was doing my own PhD at Australia, and I learned a lot from the grounded theory researchers of my colleagues and my lecturers on how they actually define their approach or their design as grounded theory. So this is very interesting, and I am actually conducting one on grounded theory for my own grant that I just got one. And then the last approach that Creswell and Koff uses in their book is phenomenology. And the research focus that they are highlighting on, or the central phenomenon, and not just Creswell, but also Husserl, Heidegger, and staff, they use the word to explore and understand the lived experiences. Yeah, the lived experiences, and the word and the keyword that they use is to make meaning or meaning making when experiencing a phenomenon. This is also used in my team and I in my research grant that we actually secured. We use interpretive phenomenon analysis, and we use hermeneutical, and our main author is actually Heidegger. It's about descriptive and interpretive, and we have two key features, and the common types are as in the table. So what I want to highlight, especially in this webinar or this webinar, is actually when we have this research focus or the central phenomenon keyword, yeah, and then we can actually put our research side by side and not really compare, but trying to identify which approach is actually similar with our own study, and then we can start to identify which approach is most suitable to become our own approach. And then we can start to go to the key features and compare it again. And then we can start to sort of design our whole study on what are the common types and the common method and the common analysis and the findings and discussion that we tend to actually lay out, yeah, for our proposals, for example. I take only one example for this particular seminar. For example, if we have a student who wants to explore, and this is actually a real question last week, my colleague even asked me, he has, he has something to explore in, he has something to understand.
Sofurah, please wrap up in about 2 minutes, yeah?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm almost finished. Thank you, Dr. Ng. So he actually asked me, he has this, intention to explore an issue at some place, and it involves 2 small groups, yeah? And then he wants to understand the context of the place and that small group as well. So he has a parameter. So he asked me, is it a ethnography? And I said to him, well, we have to do this thing, and we tend to discuss about how to sort of map between his particular study and this compendium of approaches. And then once we discussed, and then we decided that he can start with case study approach, and it's a multiple case study approach, and then he starts to look at the books and the authors that he can start to read on. And then just yesterday he told me that he found the main author of what he's doing, and he found that he has at least some layout on his own proposal that he's going to develop. So he's quite happy with it, and of course, as someone who shares this compendium with him, is also happy with it. So I hope this compendium is going to be useful for all of you. I will actually share this with everyone, especially maybe giving to Dr. Ng and whoever is interested to use this as part of their mapping process. Please take notes, and I'm happy for you to use it. Okay, thank you so much, and I think this is the end of the sharing. Back to you, Datin.